Leah wasn't an accomplished practitioner of her clan's art by any means, but she knew a master when she saw one, delivering the brown parcel to Ambrogino. The elder Hecata stared blankly at the young milliner and stroked the parcel before speaking. "You didn't open it, did you?" Leah shook her head. She knew better. While she considered herself above the role of messenger, she wasn't going to steal a look at this Giovanni's mail. "No, it's exactly as Josette left it when it came to me." "And are you curious about its contents?" The fingers of Ambrogino's twisted and decayed left hand tapped on the heavy wooden desk, creating a rhythmic drumming. Was this a test? Should she express curiosity or respect for her elder? Again, honesty among families seemed to be the best course. "I would be interested to find out what I've traveled across the world to hand-deliver, yes." Ambrogino slid a knife into the edge of the parcel, parting its seams. His healthy hand extracted a small clay sculpture. Though far from an expert, to Leah, it looked Egyptian. Ambrogino held the sculpture in the light. "This is what is known as a fetter. It binds a spirit to this mortal plane. If I were to destroy it, it might destroy the spirit. If I were to lock it away in a vault, the spirit might choose to owe me something in the future. If I were to threaten it, however." The necromancer cut his thumb and ran his own vitae over the sculpture, chanting in a dead language. He stuffed out the lights in the room with the press of a button. Leah stood there, awaiting some grand arrival. Instead, she heard a shaky, frail voice emerge into the room. "Please, my child, please leave me be. Please, do not harm my link. Please, I'll serve you again." Ambrogino smiled, his perpetual rotted teeth, a mix of yellow and blacks, contrasted against his purple lips and pale skin. "If I were to threaten it, Leah Milliner, I can get the spirit to do whatever I want." Greetings, Kindred. I am Voivode Maquette, and welcome back to our world of darkness, where today we're going to be discussing Oblivion, or at least a branch of it, because Oblivion has broken into two disciplines. Whether you call it necromancy, or obtenebration, shadowboxing, mortis, or one of the various other nicknames it might have, obtenebration is quickly becoming one of my favorite disciplines due to the split that it's undergone in this iteration. And the Hecata, who use this version of Oblivion, is quickly becoming one of my favorite clans represented in the 5th edition. So, let us see what the book has to say about Necromantic Oblivion. Oblivion is a mysterious, unpalatable power that most vampires rightly fear to use, witness, or fall victim to. Only vampires of clans La Sombra and Hecata wield it with any frequency, and even they do so tentatively. Oblivion requires cautious masters, who know the power's risks, as no other discipline reaches into the underworld and allows its manipulators to extract tangible darkness, or furious specters. Oblivion is the darkest of arts. Notably, while the La Sombra are prone to expanding their repertoire of Oblivion powers, the Hecata focus their energies on developing ceremonies. Ceremonies take longer, but are required for communing with and making passage through to the land of the dead. Now, Oblivion is probably one of the disciplines that's gone through one of the most major changes. And I say that because it never existed before. There was no such thing as the power of Oblivion. In older editions, we had Obtenebration, which was the power of wielding darkness and shadow that the Lasombra used. And then there was Necromancy, which was a very similar art to Thaumaturgy, except instead of dealing with various aspects of nature and magic, it dealt with the dead and the various aspects of the dead lands. I personally like the way that Obtenebration and Necromancy has been directed by 5th edition to having a common link, because Obtenebration was always one of those disciplines that was always just like, what the fuck is happening? Whenever reading a book or a story on how the Lasombra were using Obtenebration, it was always, what are they talking to? Is there another dimension of nothing but malevolent shadows running around? Is there another layer of the Umbra that's just out of reach? And I like the fact that it's simplified things down to they are specters. They are interacting with the Shadowlands, but on a darker area of it, the Labyrinth to Malpheus, to be specific. And the fact that they have made it so that there's a common link between Necromancy and Obtenebration makes it a lot more interesting to me, because it now shows that there is the discipline of Oblivion, but then there are the scientific applications of the discipline. That is what brings the Hecata to my attention, because you have all of these amazing groups, the Clan Giovanni, the Cappadocians, the Harbingers of Skulls, which are now the Harbingers of Ashir, the various families that the Giovanni employed but were always overlooked in older editions of Vampire the Masquerade, the Nagaraja, the Zamedi. There's so many of them, and the fact that they were able to bring them down into being one thing, the Hecata, is so much fun. And I love the fact that they're using Hecate as the face of this new necromantic organization, because in fact what we're looking at here is another sect. This group of vampires are talking about how they're independent. This group of vampires waves the banner of independence in everyone's faces, but they're not anymore. They have more groups within their sect than the Camarilla. They are a massive organization, and they're trying to keep things quiet about that, still using the Giovanni as the face. Now, the one thing that they all have in common, however, is Oblivion, where we're going to be focusing on the spiritual aspects and the scientific aspects of Oblivion over the Obtenebration aspects of Oblivion. This is a study on the necromantic applications. The book Cults of the Blood Gods goes on to say, Oblivion allows for the manipulation of creatures and substances originating from the underworld. When the Hecata use this discipline, they tend to channel the entropic nature of the underworld and its surroundings, decaying flesh, calling forth spirits and posing a dangerous risk to the living. Oblivion projections and spirits sustain damage from fire and sunlight, counting as vampires with a blood potency of 1 in this regard. They also take 1 level of aggravated health damage per round from bright direct lights, and may also be damaged superficially or aggravated from blessed weapons and artifacts, depending on the strength of the blessing and whether the wielder has true faith. Oblivion's powers are ineffective in brightly lit areas. Daylight and rooms without shadows are prohibitive, preventing the discipline's successful function. Though ultraviolet light and infrared light place no restrictions on the discipline's use. Moderately lit rooms applying 1 die penalty to the discipline roll involved. The use of Oblivion negatively affects the necromancer's psyche. The vampire finds themselves performing increasingly macabre acts in service to this discipline. Type: mental. Masquerade threat: medium-high. Spirits rarely show up well on cameras, but are obviously unnatural if witnessed in person. Blood resonance: psychopaths and emotionally detached. Blood empty of resonance. Note: when making a rouse check for an Oblivion power or ceremony, a result in 1 or 10 results in a stain in addition to any hunger gained. If the user's blood potency allows for a reroll on the rouse check, they can pick either of the two results. The discipline of Necromancy has always been one of a darker aspect, but they've always been rather vague on its preparation, on how things work. There's never been much description on how the disciplines are actually done, and that's always been up to the storyteller and the player to come up with something that works for them. With Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, they've filled in the blanks slightly. There's a little bit more of a, you are walking on the edge of something dark, and there are repercussions for your actions. And I think that that is one of the things that really holds its own in Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, because there's just an essence of, you shouldn't be doing this in the discipline itself and in its ceremonies. And I think that was always something that was lacking, because in earlier editions there were no risks of stains. There was barely any risk of humanity when it came to using the discipline. And when you look at the older editions, when you rip somebody's soul out of their body, there should be repercussions on yours. When you are collecting the materials to be able to use some of the old rituals that came with Necromancy, there really should have been some repercussion on, how did you get this? Why did you get this? What the hell kind of person collects this? It can't just be simply, oh, I found it on eBay. So looking at the necromantic version of Oblivion, level 1, Ashes to Ashes. Destroying evidence of feeding is a common necessity among vampires who leave screaming, resisting vessels, especially when those same vessels end up dead. This power enables a vampire to destroy a corpse, fresh or long dead, by introducing their vitae to its body. This power does not work on vampires, but does work on animated cadavers. Cost: 1 rouse check. Dice pool: stamina plus Oblivion versus stamina plus medicine or fortitude. System: the vampire makes a rouse check to expend vitae, and introduces the vitae to the corpse. Unless the corpse is animated, the body disintegrates over 3 turns with no tests necessary. If it is, the user rolls a contest of stamina plus Oblivion versus the stamina plus medicine. Corpses with fortitude may resist with stamina plus fortitude. If the user wins, the animated corpse dissolves in 5 turns, minus the margin, minimum of 1, and disintegrating corpses suffer physical impairment. On a critical win, the corpse disintegrates immediately. On a total failure, the corpse putrefies but does not disintegrate, and is subsequently immune to this power from any user. Duration: variable. This is a very, very fun power. I like this power because it actually reminds me of one of the Ordo Drak Cool's gifts in Requiem to help destroy the evidence of feedings. But this one has a combat. This one does have a combat use, and that is if you are fighting any of the Walking Dead, animated corpses and the like. Now, where it tells you have to roll a test against an animated corpse, where it's your stamina plus Oblivion versus the stamina and medicine. I'm assuming that actually means the individual who brought it back and not the corpse itself, because I don't really see a shambler having a medicine ability. I could very well be wrong, and I think this would be a good point to take a second to look at the corpse So the Mindless Corpse NPC has nothing, and the Homuncular Servant has nothing. The Aggressive Corpse has nothing in ways of medicine. So I would assume that would mean that you are going against the medicine of the individual who created the abomination, and not the corpse itself. Now, as for standard necromancy of any kind, I think the closest thing that this has anything to do with would be the Ashes to Ashes power of the Zameti, but that had more to do, that was almost like an Earthmeld gift where you yourself disintegrated, not a body that you were able to find. But I think this is a welcome addition to necromancy. I do, however, miss the old first level of necromancy, where, and it was, I believe, the Sepulchre Path, where you could use the eyes of a corpse to find out how they died and possibly find out who the killer was. Now, the next level is the Binding Fetter. The vampire closes their eyes, and upon opening them, the irises of their eyes display a dull reflection of their surroundings, as they can identify objects or locations important to ghosts. These fetters act as icons that bind the dead to their existence. Knowing if an object is a fetter allows the necromancer to better manipulate ghosts. Fetters emanate variable auras, some bursting with vitality and glowing gold light, others radiating decay or odors important to the bound wraith, such as the smell of freshly baked bread, gasoline, or cigarette smoke. Cost free. System. On activation, the user's senses become supernaturally attuned to the energies of fetters, and they may identify these auras by sight, smell, and other senses. While this power is in the use, the necromancer is distracted from other activity around them, conveying a -2 penalty to all awareness, wits, and resolves linked rolls. Duration, 1 scene. This is a very good power to have at the beginning for any necromancer, that's for damn sure. And I can see how it would be one or the other. Are you gonna do Ashes to Ashes and help get rid of corpses, or are you gonna help locate fetters to help control ghosts? This is almost a separation between, are you gonna take Ash Path or Bone Path when it came to the way necromancy used to work. Now, I do believe in the old system, locating a fetter was actually a ritual. So being able to effectively do this makes a lot of sense. I'm very surprised, however, that this is not an amalgam. How this isn't an amalgam of, it's a level 1 it's a level 1 necromancy power, a level 1 oblivion power, but you don't have to have at least the first level of aspects, because it does affect the senses. Now, I'm also a huge fan of the fact that it's not just sight. If you have, I like the idea of things being affected by smell. I think that is a very underused descriptive resource. So that's always fun. Level 2. Fatal Precognition. Amalgam Aspects 2. So we do have our first amalgam here. It is said by many necromancers that the Lady of Fate rules the underworld through her Stygian servants, and through communion with her, certain death dealers have learned this power. Fatal Precognition allows a vampire to scry any non-vampire and experience a vision of their impending death. Whether it's due a minute from now or several decades away, the Kindred's eyes turn black and they stand, sit, or lie completely still as the fate plays out in their minds. Fate can, of course, be cheated, though there's a cost for doing so. Cost, 1 rouse check. Dice pool, resolve plus oblivion. System. The vampire must be able to see or hear their target when they use this power. After rolling, resolve plus oblivion, difficulty 3 or more at the storyteller's discretion, the vampire becomes paralyzed in place as the vision plays out, preventing them from any form of physical or social interaction for that turn. The higher the margin, the clearer the vision. A win grants sight of the corpse, and with each point of margin, an additional clue is provided, such as the manner of death, time and place of death, or the name and face of the first living person to find the corpse. A critical win on this roll grants the vampire a vision of crystal clarity, along with a sense of the motive, if the target is intentionally killed. A total failure renders the vampire blind for the remainder of the scene and unable to use this power on the same target again. If anyone attempts to subvert the fate observed in this way, they find everything working against their hubristic ambition. Add 1 to all difficulties while working to directly circumvent the precognition. As cars break down, storms erupt from nowhere, and people become hostile for no reason. This penalty applies until the prophecy is fulfilled or avoided, or the current story ends. Duration: until fulfilled, avoided, or the story ends. Fatal Precognition seems almost like a ritual, and it also seems like a high ritual. The fact that this is a leveled power is actually kind of crazy, considering that this is plot building. This is a massive plot building thing. You could set up an entire thing where, like, let's just go ahead and say that a coterie of vampires is hired as bodyguards to a mortal that the prince finds important. Maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a ghoul, maybe it's something, but it's something, one of the prince's touchstones or something like that. So they hire a Giovanni, so they hire a Hecata to try to figure out exactly what is going to happen with this, and they find it, and at that point you're just playing Final Destination as an escort mission for as long as it happens. And I don't know, I think this power right here takes a lot of responsibility on the storyteller, because you do have to think of an end game, and it can't just be, well, this is your life forever, because that'll ruin the game for other players, and that's not something that you want to do. But I can see how much fun this level would be. Also level 2, where the shroud thins. Vampires with any affinity for Oblivion can sense locations where the shroud between the world of the living and the Shadowlands thins. Though this discipline doesn't directly tell the vampire why the shroud between the world is thin in a certain place, it may be due to a grisly murder that took place there many years before, or because necromancers have frequently used the location to summon spirits, or it might be a location of holy or unholy resonance, among other reasons. In locations where the shroud is thinnest, mortals' health suffer, and use of the Oblivion discipline becomes easier, if the vampire knows how to harness the gap in the shadows. Cost: 1 rouse check. Dice pool: wits plus oblivion. System: following a rouse check, the player rolls wits plus oblivion, difficulty 3, and on a win may determine the density of the shroud in their nearby area, as large as an entire building or landmark. On a critical win, this power reveals whether the shadow's density recently changed. On a total failure, the power backfires and gives a false reading. Without use of this power, Oblivion users cannot benefit from the thinning of the shroud. Duration: 1 scene. Now, that's a very, very interesting way of looking at things, and they do provide a very handy chart, which I will display here. If the shroud is impenetrable, no deaths took place here or its consecrated land, and the effect vampires and wraiths cannot cross the Shroud here. It basically means there's a door to the Shadowlands and it's completely closed. A thick Shroud says that long ago a death took place here, or it's a place of joy, and there's no effect. You're just dealing with standard stuff. A thin Shroud means that the death recently took place here. Melancholic mortals often pass through this place. And a -1 difficulty on Oblivion rolls, so it's probably a Starbucks or something like that. A frayed Shroud means that a series of deaths took place here, or necromancers often enact ceremonies here, and it is a -2 difficulty on Oblivion rolls. So that means that you could actually, if you found a spot that had a thick Shroud, you could just continuously do rituals there and eventually wear down the Shroud. And I like the fact that that is a possibility with these rules here. An absent Shroud. A necromancer used split the Shroud here. Specters regularly pass through this part of the Shroud, so you're probably looking at haunted houses and things like that. It is a -2 difficulty on Oblivion rolls. Wraiths can freely pass to and from the Shadowlands. Mortals suffer 2 superficial health damage in this area, and they cannot be healed until they depart. That tells me, like, this is one of those places that you go into and you just suddenly don't feel well. A headache, stomach problems, things like that. And I've been in areas like that. There are definitely spots that you can't explain why you just feel out of sorts in those places. So I'm assuming that's what we're talking about here. Level 3, Aura of Decay. Kindred with a strong connection to Oblivion find the discipline affecting the world around them, making plants wilt, animals and humans grow sick, and food go bad. Some harness this aura as a power, polluting vitality with rot, and speeding up the erosion of life. This power does not speed up the decay of dead bodies. Cost, 1 rouse check. Dice pool. Stamina plus Oblivion versus Stamina plus Medicine or Fortitude. System. The vampire makes a rouse check following a Stamina plus Oblivion roll difficulty of 3. Unintelligent organic or inorganic material within 5 yards, meters, of them suffer. Plants turn black and die, food rots in its packaging, and even bricks start crumbling. Material affected in this way can become toxic to ingest. If, for instance, this power is used in a kitchen or a water supply, such toxic foods and drink, if consumed, can be expected to inflict 2 unhalved superficial health damage in the following scene to an individual who eats it, and for each scene thereafter until treated, with an intelligence plus medicine roll difficulty of 3. If anything living is caught in the area, it makes a stamina plus medicine. Those with fortitude may resist with stamina plus fortitude contest against the vampire's activation roll. For every point of margin the vampire has, the victim suffers 1 point of unhalved superficial damage. This damage is slowly applied throughout the scene. Repeated application of this power in the same scene have no effect on the health of mortals already affected. The power in an aura that lasts for an entire scene before it fades away. Anyone with a sense of smell can detect the rotting odor emanating from the vampire during the time this power is active, inflicting a 2 dice penalty to any social rolls the vampire makes in a positive or diplomatic context, if doing so in person. Duration, 1 scene. This is a very interesting one because it kind of implies that it happens to vampires regardless. That if you practice Oblivion long enough, you're just going to get, like, Touch of Decay. And yeah, it seems like it's something like you're paying for the ability to capitalize on a flaw here, to be able to direct it in a fashion. And it actually does point out, like, this is a good explanation of what the old Cappadocian clan weakness was, where they weren't able to actually interact with people because they gave off that death energy. Level 3, Passion Feast. Amalgam Fortitude 2. The relationship between vampires and their need for blood as sustenance is well known, but when a vampire needs to spend an extended period in the Shadowlands, or wishes to torment a spirit, this Oblivion power allows them to sustain on the passions of wraiths. Wraiths have no bodies, nor do they have blood. Instead, their raw emotions drive them. Love, hatred, greed, or even a need for vengeance might keep a wraith around after their former body's death. An accomplished necromancer can feed on these passions for a time, enabling them to survive without blood for longer than their fellow kindred. The feeding manifests a swirling vortex of power between the wraith and the vampire's maw, as the vampire doesn't need to actually bite down on anything to consume passions. Cost: free. Dice pool: Resolve plus Oblivion versus Resolve plus Composure. System: a vampire with this power can drain a wraith of their passion. While in close proximity, 3 yards or meters or closer to the wraith, they may roll a contest of Resolve plus Oblivion versus the wraith's Resolve plus Composure. A win for the vampire inflicts 1 aggravated damage to the wraith and reduces the vampire's hunger by 1 for the remainder of the night. The hunger returns on the following night regardless of the rouse check, as the feeding is only a nepenthe to dull the vampire's hunger urges. Feeding from the wraith may merit a stain at a storyteller discretion, as the consumed passion dulls the wraith's reason for being, likely sending them down the path of self-destructive acts. The storyteller determines the number of passions a wraith possesses, though 5 or more is rare, and may deem that the wraith becomes an uncontrollable, murderous specter once all passions have been consumed. Duration: passive. Passion Feast is left over from Nihilistics, or the vitreous path of necromancy that the Nagaraja used, and I'm enjoying the fact that it's here, but I also think it's kind of strange that it's just available now, and this isn't like this isn't part of the lore sheet for the Flesh Eaters, for the Nagaraja. But I'm glad it is. I'm also glad that it's a amalgam, because it basically states that it's not something that's naturally learned. So the fact that it is there, if you decided to do a Dark Age game, the storyteller, I would not feel bad as a storyteller saying, I'm sorry, but Passion Feast doesn't exist. So no, you can't take this. Of course, when you're looking at necromancy in the Dark Ages, you're looking at a more physical-based thing anyway, due to the fact that the whole Feast of Folly situation was Cappadocius not being happy with his child's progress on learning how to use necromancy on more spiritual aspects of existence. But Passion Feast is so interesting, and I like the fact that it's not just a you can eat wraiths, that it's a nepenthe, and what that is it's a potion to make you forget something. So that is that's a very interesting thing that just makes you forget that you're hungry. And it's also something that will just keep coming back. You will eventually get to the point where you have Hunger 5, and you might just be sitting there like draining wraiths left and right trying to forget it. But that would drive you insane, which explains the Harbingers of Ushir. If they did get this while they were in the Shadowlands, which I don't see them not. I do see this being something that they would have access to and learning after the Feast of Folly. Level 4, Necrotic Plague. Kindred scholars claim Oblivion pollutes everything it touches, with this power as a prime example. Through touch alone, a vampire might poison a mortal victim's blood, imbuing them with a disease that racks and ravages their body. Most dangerously of all, the disease runs the risk of becoming contagious and might inflict the same harm to other mortals. Necromancers schooled in medicine have enough talent to make this power appear in the form of specific illnesses, sometimes including those that died out a decade or centuries past. Regardless of how it manifests, the symptoms will eventually disappear, even without medical treatment, whether or not the victim survives. Cost: 1 rouse check, 2 stains. Dice pool: Intelligence plus Oblivion versus Stamina plus Medicine or Fortitude. System: the user makes a rouse check, and then rolls Intelligence plus Oblivion while touching their victim. If the victim is weak, a baby, elderly, unwell, recovering from an illness, dying, or with 3 unmarked health boxes or less, they are automatically infected. If the victim is healthy, they roll Stamina plus Medicine. Those with Fortitude may use it in place of Medicine, resisting the disease if they roll more successes than the vampire. The power cannot be used on vampires. Storytellers may decide that spreading such a horrific disease warrants stains. Victims of the disease take 1 aggravated health damage at the start of every scene, following their infection. The victim suffers from the disease for a number of scenes equal to the user's Oblivion rating. The sickness cannot be medically treated, as it is a supernatural in origin, but it is healed through drinking Vitae. If the player rolls a critical win when activating this power, they can choose to make the disease communicable by touch, with subsequent recipients suffering the disease for 1 scene fewer than the victim by whom they were infected. If the player rolls a total failure, the vampire's own Vitae convulses, as if poisoned. They suffer 3 aggravated health damage, as the infected blood pours out of them, and must make a rouse check. Duration: 1 turn to activate variable lengths of condition. Necrotic Plague kind of reminds me of the old Plague Breath ability of Mortis, and I think it does make a lot of sense to include that here. Although I do miss some of the other more typical necromantic powers that we used to have in the older editions. I do like the fact that Necromancy itself, or Oblivion itself, for the Hecata, has taken a more Cappadocian Mortis way of doing things. I can definitely see some possibilities for screwing with people with this, poisoning ghouls and such. Plus, you have to keep in mind that the Hecata, in general, have a mentality of being here to see the end as a goal. They want to be the ones to live. They don't want to live forever. They're ready to die, but they do want to be here to see the last of it, to see how the world ends. And I can kind of understand that, but I can also understand that after a century or two, that might get a little old, and hurrying things along could definitely be something that they'd be interested in doing. Level 5. Skuld Fulfilled. Necromancers can be described as fate's greatest meddlers, as they have a way of interfering with the destined paths of lives and spirits. Occasionally, however, necromancers may seek to serve fate by punishing those who cheat it. This power enables a vampire to reintroduce illnesses to victims who recovered from them, break bones long since healed, and eliminate the immunity of aging ghouls experience. While this power doesn't work on vampires, it is an effective way of cutting through their servants and ensuring debts to fate are repaid without having to come into contact with the recipient. Cost: 2 rouse checks. Dice pool: Stamina plus Oblivion versus Stamina plus Medicine or Fortitude. System: The vampire makes 2 rouse checks as they expend sufficient blood to coat both their palms and their face with blood as they recall the faces of their victims. If the user succeeds in the contest of stamina plus oblivion versus the victim's stamina plus medicine, those with fortitude may resist with stamina plus fortitude, the targeted individual is affected by a serious condition they've historically suffered and recovered from, such as treated cancer, a broken bone, or disease, including ones gained through necrotic plague, with any debilitating effects from this condition occurring immediately. The condition's effects are for the storyteller to determine, but they should be severe. If the victim is a ghoul, this power removes their immunity to aging and eliminates any vitae in their system, potentially resulting in older ghouls dying or even disintegrating where they stand. On a critical win, this power may kill the victim by stopping their heart completely, if the user wishes. On a total failure, the vampire cannot use this power against the individual again. Duration. Variable, depending on whether the condition is treatable. I can't think of any older necromancy abilities that allowed this kind of thing, but I do see it. It reminds me of something you'd see in a movie, which I kind of enjoy. I like the idea of taking something that a person has personally triumphed over and destroying them with it. It's a little morbid, it's a little fucked up, but it is something that makes a lot of sense when it comes to dealing in vampire. I like the idea of the person who has been through trauma and has... It's not just physically crippling at that point, it's also mentally crippling. It's the I beat this factor being ripped out from under them. And the fact that they are going to be able to use that on a victim is very interesting. If this could be used on vampires, which unfortunately it cannot be, could you imagine some of the things that you'd be able to do to them? It'd be arguable that the embrace is a injury or something that they've gone through, where you'd be able to just use this power on them and drain them of all their blood instantly. But I can understand why this is only used on humans. Level 5, Withering Spirit. This power channels raw entropy via rapid spiritual decay, affecting vampires as well as kine by targeting the victim's spirit. A vampire using this power risks stains, as it can completely obliterate the victim's spirit, preventing return as a wraith. Cost: 2 rouse checks. Stains, variable amounts. Dice pool: Resolve plus Oblivion versus Resolve plus Occult or Fortitude. System: the vampire makes 2 rouse checks to expend sufficient vitae to coat both hands and touches the victim. After rolling Resolve plus Oblivion versus the victim's Resolve plus Occult, those with Fortitude may use it in place of the Occult. The victim suffers 2 aggravated willpower damage for each point of the vampire's margin. The attack erodes the victim's spirit until they're a broken husk, and if impaired by this power, they will not return as a wraith after death. Storytellers may decide that the spirit-destroying nature of this power warrants stains, though, as always, an appropriate conviction may mitigate these. Duration: 1 turn. That, my friends, is a hell of a power. I would say that it definitely does warrant stains, regardless of Path of Enlightenment or anything, due to the fact that you are completely fucking their soul up. You're making it so they cannot continue on to the next thing. Now, what happens after Wraith? Nobody knows. So, you are effectively killing them past killing them. This power is a lot of fun and really messed up, but it really does just... I'm surprised there's not a separate youth of Withering Spirit on actual wraiths. You know, like, you use Withering Spirit as almost like Torment was in the older systems, where it physically hurt the wraith. So, the concept of the Hecata is amazing, and they are, again, one of my favorite clans up and coming in 5th edition. But I'm not a big fan on Necromantic Oblivion. I think it's a good power, but I just think it feels compact and restrained, and I think that's because I'm so used to having so many different paths of necromancy. We had the Bone Path, we had the Ash Path, the Sepulture Path, the Mortis Path, the Vitreous Path. There are so many different paths that you could play with. It was, again, it was very much like Thaumaturgy. And when I do my video on Blood Sorcery, it's going to continue over. There is more to Oblivion. There are Oblivion ceremonies. But I do believe that I'm going to save those for a video all their own, because they deserve special time to be looked into. So I believe that's what we're going to see next Friday. But this has been a look at Oblivion, and I wonder what everybody else thinks of it, because this is one of those disciplines that I just couldn't really think of many things to use it for, because it is a spur-of-the-moment thing, in my opinion. The idea of... I wouldn't take Withering Spirit. There's some of these things that I actually just would not take. If I was building a character, a Hecata, for my own uses, I would most likely take Ashes to Ashes, Where the Shroud Thins, Passion Feast, Necrotic Plague, and Scald Fulfilled. Those would most likely be the things that I would take if I was breaking in a new Hecata. Now, I haven't had a chance to do that as a player character yet, and most of the characters that I bring as NPCs are remakes of NPCs that I've already used, because, and I don't know if I've actually expressed this or not, but I have a magnum opus. I have a plot line that I'm known for, and I always, when V5 came out, I really wanted to know what it would look like if that storyline was told in the setting of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition, because originally it was set in the 90s, and currently I'm playing it in 2021. So the NPCs that I'm bringing in are NPCs that have already existed. I'm not creating NPCs off the top of my head that have not, who don't already have a personality in mind. So I have a Duncern as Giovanni. I have a Salvador Giovanni, who's a crime boss who I'm using as a Putanesca. So I haven't had a chance to actually build what I would consider a Hecata. I've currently got Giovanni, and I have a Samedi, but I'm still running off with the same personalities that they had before the family reunion. I do plan on bringing in new NPCs who have the new mentality of what the Clan of Death is actually supposed to be like, and I cannot wait to see how they react and interact in a world that still has my NPCs in it with their mentalities. But we will definitely see. At least I will see. If anybody's interested, I'm happy to share the stories. But I am... we'll definitely see. We'll see what's going to happen with the Hecata in the World of Darkness setting. So, I am Voivode Maquette. This is our World of Darkness, and this has been a look on the necromantic arts of Oblivion, practiced by the members of Clan Hecata. Our next video discussing gifts will be on Oblivion ceremonies of the Hecata. Good evening.